A grainy photograph, dated 1892, of a bustling construction site in the heart of St. Petersburg shows an intricate scaffolding structure rising towards the sky. At first glance, it appears to be a standard image of industrial progress. Yet, as we zoom in, the image reveals a bizarre anomaly. Towering stone blocks, seemingly untouched by the labourers below, positioned with surgical precision, defying the technological norms of the time. The caption reads, "Unidentified workers, 1892, St. Petersburg." What is most striking is the absence of the cranes and scaffolding typically required for such monumental stonework. The physical impossibility of the scene begins to gnaw at the edges of the official narrative. Could it be that these blocks were not moved by the methods we know? What if this is a visual fragment of a forgotten era, one that employed technologies too advanced for the age they belong to? What then happened to the methods we once understood? We begin in 1893, where most of us are familiar with the image of grand exhibitions like the Chicago World's Fair, a period of industrial triumph. The official history reveals cities flourishing, transportation booming, and technological innovation reaching unprecedented heights. At face value, the narrative is one of progress: steam engines, telegraph lines, railway expansion across continents. The photographs from this era show grand boulevards, ornate civic buildings, monuments to human ingenuity. But this is where the seeds of discomfort are sown. In the records, a specific contradiction quietly emerges. Cities like St. Petersburg, whose stone monuments seem to defy the ordinary rules of construction, are being celebrated. But those same structures leave behind questions no one seems to answer. The census data from 1890 shows a population barely sufficient to sustain such monumental building programs. The labour force statistics don't match the output. As we trace their histories, we begin to wonder, could the industrial age have relied on far older, lost methods of construction? Methods that were deliberately erased from memory. The timeline of progress, we've been taught, suddenly feels less certain, more constructed than discovered. The 1893 Chicago World's Fair stands as a spectacular display of progress, technology, and innovation. The photographs tell a clear story: massive buildings, architectural feats that seem in tune with their time. The White City, as it was called, sprawled across 690 acres of what had been swampland just 2 years earlier. Daniel Burnham's official records documented the construction timeline: ground broken in 1891, grand opening in May 1893. But as we examine the fine details, one image stands out. An aerial view of the fairgrounds shows no visible machinery. There are no cranes, no tools, no scaffolding, just a pristine, finished skyline. Contemporary accounts describe thousands of workers, yet photographs from the construction period show curiously empty grounds. The Manufactures and Liberal Arts Building, the largest structure ever built at that time, covering 31 acres under a single roof, was supposedly erected in months. The official records are clear. The buildings were completed in just 2 years. Was this rapid construction truly the work of thousands of labourers, or was something else at play? The photographic evidence and the documented timeline cannot both be fully accurate. These questions are left to linger unanswered. Census records from 1880 to 1900 depict dramatic population surges in industrial cities across Europe and the United States. Chicago's population supposedly exploded from 503,000 in 1880 to 1.7 million by 1900. Similar patterns appear in Denver, San Francisco, and dozens of other cities. Immigration records are cited as the explanation: waves of European settlers seeking opportunity in the New World. Yet photographs taken during the same periods seem to show empty streets and eerily sparse crowds. An 1895 photograph of Broadway in New York, captioned "Midday Traffic," shows perhaps a dozen people across several blocks. The contradictions between the growth depicted in the records and the apparent absence of life in the images are undeniable. As we examine the statistical anomalies, it becomes clear that something is being overlooked. Were these demographic shifts fabricated, or is there another explanation entirely? Immigration manifests from Ellis Island show thousands arriving weekly, but photographs of immigrant processing reveal facilities that appear undersized for such volume. The disparity between the narrative of rapid urban growth and the visual silence of these cities is a mystery that cannot be ignored. The census statistics suggest a boom in industrial workers, but the photographs reveal something different. Vast, empty expanses where one would expect bustling activity. The mystery of the stone blocks in St. Petersburg deepens. A closer look at the archival photographs reveals an incongruity. Massive stones, perfectly placed, with no clear means of transportation. The Church of the Saviour on Spilled Blood, completed in 1907, required thousands of tons of precisely cut granite. Historical records claim that the construction of these monumental buildings was done using primitive cranes and manual labour, with stones transported by horse-drawn cart from distant quarries. But the stones appear too heavy, too precisely arranged to be moved with such rudimentary methods. Modern engineers examining the same photographs note the absence of ground disturbance around the foundation stones. No ruts from heavy carts, no evidence of the reinforced roads that would have been necessary. A single foundation block, photographed in detail in 1895, shows no tool marks consistent with 19th century cutting techniques. What if these stones were transported by something far more advanced? A fleeting thought begins to emerge. What if airships, unknown to modern history, were used to transport the heavy blocks? The hypothesis seems impossible, yet the evidence refuses to align with conventional explanations. The stones are there. They were placed with precision. But by what method? The official narrative offers only manual labour and determination. The physical evidence whispers of capabilities we're not meant to remember. Old exhibition records from 1905 document a display at the Paris Exposition that was described as airborne transport technology. The catalogue entry, preserved in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, lists demonstration of suspended carrier systems among the technological exhibits. There are no photographs, only descriptions. The terms used in these records don't match any known technology of the time. They speak of suspended carriers and levitation systems, words that seem almost too advanced for an era still relying heavily on steam power. The absence of images is troubling, but the records cannot be dismissed. Similar references appear in exhibition catalogues from London, 1899, and Berlin, 1902, always in the sections devoted to industrial transportation innovations, always without photographic documentation. One notation from the Berlin catalogue reads, "Transport mechanism for stone and heavy materials. Demonstration postponed due to weather conditions." The demonstration was never rescheduled, and no follow-up records exist. Could these suspended carriers have been primitive airships capable of lifting heavy stones from one place to another, as some obscure accounts suggest? The idea begins to take hold. What if we've misjudged the capabilities of the past? What if the technology existed, but was systematically removed from the historical record after a certain point? The exhibition records remain fragmentary and inexplicable, pointing toward capabilities that shouldn't have existed, yet apparently did, at least long enough to warrant display at major international expositions. A seemingly unrelated mystery arises from the orphan train records. Between 1854 and 1929, the Children's Aid Society documented placing over 200,000 orphan children with families across the American frontier. But strange patterns emerge in the records. Children with no known origin, families disappearing without a trace, and birth records that vanish entirely. Intake forms from the 1880s and 1890s show a disturbing consistency. Origin unknown, parents deceased, the form reads over and over. The New York Foundling Hospital records from 1895 show 3,847 children processed in a single year, yet birth records for these same children cannot be located in city archives. The volume is impossible to explain through conventional means. Epidemics are cited in official accounts, but death certificates matching the supposed parent deaths are largely absent. These children, whose very existence is recorded, but whose origins remain ambiguous, are a missing link in the puzzle. Was this systematic displacement a consequence of a wider social engineering effort? Were these children, with no known roots, part of a larger experiment or effort to repopulate a world reshaped by forces unknown? Photographs of the orphan trains show well-dressed children, healthy and clean, staring at the camera with expressions that seem too composed, too uniform. They don't look like children rescued from poverty and disease. They look like they're being redistributed, reassigned to a world that needed sudden repopulation. The photographs we've studied, the empty streets, the abandoned buildings, the silent fairgrounds, all begin to converge in a way that cannot be ignored. These visual anomalies are no longer just curiosities. They are signs of something far deeper. An 1897 photograph of downtown Denver, taken on a weekday afternoon, shows fully constructed streetcar lines, paved roads, electric street lamps, and not a single person visible across 4 city blocks. The missing workers in the photographs, the vacant streets of booming cities, and the orphaned children, all these threads are leading to the same uncomfortable conclusion. Official explanations cite long exposure, times for the empty streets, suggesting that moving people simply didn't register on photographic plates of the era. Yet photographs of military parades from the same period, using the same camera technology, show crowds in perfect clarity. Perhaps these anomalies are not random. Perhaps they are evidence of something deliberately hidden. The pattern repeats across continents, grand architecture appearing fully formed, population statistics that don't match photographic evidence, children without verifiable origins flooding into newly built cities. The individual elements, examined in isolation, might be dismissed. A quirk of photography here, an administrative oversight there, a tragic epidemic somewhere else. But together they whisper a different story. Together they suggest infrastructure inherited rather than built, populations redistributed rather than grown, and a timeline of human civilization that has been carefully edited to present continuous progress rather than sudden reset. A chilling thought begins to emerge. As we track similar architectural anomalies across continents, from Europe to America, from Russia to South America, the same patterns of advanced, unexplainable structures begin to emerge. The Palacio de Bellas Artes in Mexico City began in 1904. The Reichstag in Berlin, completed in 1894. The Sacré-Cœur Basilica in Paris, finished in 1914. Each required thousands of tons of precisely cut stone. Each was built in a remarkably short time frame, and each shares architectural sophistication that seems inconsistent with the documented construction methods. These buildings were not constructed in the time period we thought, nor by the means we believed. Were these structures the remnants of a civilization that existed before the reset? The architectural styles, while officially classified as distinct movements, Beaux-Arts, Neo-Byzantine, Renaissance Revival, share underlying engineering principles that suggest common origin rather than parallel evolution. We begin to see the architecture as part of a larger synchronized effort to rebuild a world that was once lost. Across the oceans in cities far apart, the same bizarre patterns emerge. Grand public buildings completed within years, often with inauguration dates that precede documented construction timelines. The cornerstone of the Boston Public Library reads 1888, yet photographs from 1887 show the structure substantially complete. Similar anachronisms appear in government records across 3 continents. The synchronicity cannot be coincidental. Something was being rebuilt, systematically and globally, in the late 19th century. Not constructed from nothing, but restored, repurposed, and presented as new. As we dig deeper into the lost airship records, the unsettling truth emerges. The technology to move massive stone blocks, to raise entire buildings, to reshape cities. It was already here, just hidden from view. Patent applications from the 1890s, long buried in archival offices, describe aerial freight conveyance systems and atmospheric suspension mechanisms for heavy loads. The technical drawings are too degraded to reproduce, and the patents themselves were never granted final approval, listed as withdrawn by applicant or abandoned due to technical review. The photographs, the census records, the architectural anomalies, they are all pieces of a larger puzzle, one that suggests the existence of an advanced, forgotten civilization. An 1896 newspaper clipping from the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, discovered in microfilm archives, mentions briefly demonstration of aerial stone transport postponed indefinitely. No follow-up article was ever published. The technology was mentioned, then forgotten, as if deliberately removed from public consciousness. But why was it erased? What happened to the people who used these technologies? The official history tells us that human flight began with the Wright brothers in 1903, yet these earlier references to aerial transport systems predate that achievement by nearly a decade. If such systems existed, why were they abandoned? Or were they simply classified, hidden, and removed from the historical narrative we've been taught? The evidence points toward knowledge that was systematically suppressed. Technologies that were once demonstrated at public exhibitions, documented in patent applications, and mentioned in newspapers, then vanished, as if a decision had been made to ensure they would not be remembered. As we piece together the historical fragments, a disturbing possibility arises. What if the reset was not just a natural catastrophe, but a deliberate effort to erase the truth and engineer a new timeline? What if the history we've been taught was crafted to conceal the existence of an advanced civilization, a civilization that was forcibly forgotten, its knowledge and technology erased? The evidence points toward a single terrifying hypothesis. This civilization was not wiped out by chance. It was reset, systematically buried. The orphan trains redistributing hundreds of thousands of children without documented origins. The world fairs showcasing fully completed cities, built in impossibly short time frames. The census records showing population explosions without corresponding immigration documentation. The photographs of empty streets in supposedly thriving metropolises. Each element, in isolation, can be explained away. Together, they form a pattern too consistent to be coincidental. The late 19th century wasn't an era of gradual industrial progress. It was a period of systematic repopulation and historical reconstruction. The grand architecture wasn't built, it was inherited and repurposed. The populations didn't grow, they were redistributed and reassigned. And the airships, those suspended carrier systems mentioned briefly in exhibition catalogues, before disappearing from the record, they were the tools used to complete the reconstruction before being deliberately forgotten. The technology was too advanced, too revealing of what came before, so it was hidden, erased from patents and photographs, mentioned only in fragments that would seem too incredible to believe. The timeline we've been taught is not a lie exactly. It's a carefully curated narrative designed to make the reset seem like progress. The implications of this theory are staggering. If the history we've been taught is not the full story, then what does it mean for our identity, for our place in this world? What does it mean for genealogy, for family trees that now seem so incomplete? The orphan train children, those 200,000 souls with no documented origins, became the grandparents and great-grandparents of millions of living Americans. Their unknown origins mean vast portions of family histories begin with administrative intake forms rather than birth records. As we look through the archives, the photographs, the records, a deeper question begins to form. If we were inherited, not descended, what does that say about us? Are we the continuation of a civilization or its replacement? The census anomalies suggest millions appeared in population records without corresponding immigration or birth documentation. They were simply there, counted, integrated into the official narrative of growth and progress. The personal reckoning extends beyond ancestry. It touches the foundations of how we understand human achievement. Every monument we thought our ancestors built, every technological milestone we thought represented gradual progress, every population centre we thought grew organically, all of it becomes suspect. Not necessarily false, but incomplete, edited, presented in a way that obscures the discontinuity, the gap in the timeline where something fundamental changed. The question of identity becomes unavoidable. If our history was manufactured, what does that make us? As the narrative of the world's history unravels, so too does our trust in the institutions that have shaped it. The census records, the historical exhibitions, the very buildings we've relied on as symbols of progress, all of them begin to seem more like pieces of an elaborate puzzle, carefully constructed but misleading. How much of what we have been taught is real, and how much has been deliberately manufactured? The institutions that recorded and preserved history, government census bureaus, world exposition committees, orphan placement societies, all emerged or expanded dramatically in the late 19th century. They documented, categorized, and standardized the very period that shows the most anomalies. Were they recording history or creating it? The synchronicity of institutional formation across continents mirrors the synchronicity of architectural reconstruction. Systems appeared globally, almost simultaneously, to manage population, document progress, and present a narrative of continuous human advancement. Once you see the pattern, it's impossible to unsee. Every official record becomes a potential revision. Every documented achievement becomes questionable. Not because the buildings don't exist or the census numbers are false, but because the interpretation, the story we've been told about how and why, no longer holds under scrutiny. The evidence whispers that we've been living in an inherited world, told it was built by gradual effort, when the truth might be far stranger and far more unsettling. The final chapter lingers on a haunting image. An empty street from a photograph we've seen before, now understood in a new light. Broadway, 1895, midday. The streetcar tracks gleam in the sun. The buildings stand perfect and complete. The electric lines are strung and functional. But the street is empty. Not the blur of motion from long exposure times, but genuine absence. The architecture exists without inhabitants, infrastructure without users, a city waiting for people to arrive and claim it. This street, once a symbol of industrial growth, is now a chilling reminder of what was lost or erased, what was wiped away from history, who was replaced, and what knowledge was buried. The airships that might have transported those impossible stone blocks, where did they go? The technologies mentioned in exhibition catalogues, why were they abandoned? The questions remain unanswered, but the investigation continues. Each photograph examined, each census, record, cross-referenced, each architectural impossibility documented, adds another piece to a puzzle that refuses to resolve into the comfortable narrative we've been taught. We are left with one final question, one that will echo through history, lingering like a forgotten photograph. What remains hidden, and what truths have we yet to uncover? The photograph still hangs in the city archive. The streets remain empty. The question remains, who were they built for?